is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I come to the floor today in support of this legislation and feel that it's a good first step. Unfortunately, it doesn't do quite what it was supposed to do, which was to really wall this off as emergency funding and address the problem, but it does authorize the money. It does set up a separate budget account. Today in the Forest Service, they spend 47% of their budget fighting fire. And for many years, I've argued on this floor that what happens is we get the fire season, the Forest Service runs out of money, so then they rob from all the accounts where they had the projects in place to do the thinning to reduce the threat of fire for the next year, and then time runs out in the season, they can't do those projects, and we get fire. And then we restore the money as a Congress, and we repeat the cycle. And today in America, there are tens of millions, if not hundreds of acres of federal forest land that are subject to catastrophic fire, disease, and bug infestation. If you're concerned about global warming and think carbon additions to the atmosphere are the problem, then you need to know that every year 290 million metric tons of carbon dioxide go into our atmosphere from forest fires. That's the equivalent to 4 to 6% of the nation's carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuel burning. This portrait here, this picture, is of Judge Steve Grasty, a Democrat in my district, his grandkids. And they're standing out in the Egley fire after it occurred in Harney County. This fire burned well over 100,000 acres and an area that obviously needed thinning and hadn't been thinned. And that's part of what brings me to the floor today, not only to support this bill, because I think it makes sense to have a separate firefighting budget. I think it makes sense to identify the most highest risk areas that need the treatment and to go in and treat them and to help the communities with grants and the things that are in this bill. But we need to do more than that, because we should have learned the lesson that treated forest is a healthier forest. When we collectively passed the Healthy Forest Restoration Act and signed into law by President Bush in 2003, the Forest Service began to have the tools to expedite the treatments in the wildland-urban interface. And the collaborative process my colleague from Idaho talked about that brought together the Community Wildfire Protection Planning Program allowed them to go outside of the mile and a half around a community and the community decide what needed to be treated. The problem in my region, Region 6, the Northwest, the great forests of America, is that most of the fire starts, over 1,400 of them in 2007, started up in the ridgelines and deep in the forests. Only a dozen or 2 dozen started right around the wildland-urban interface. The foresters, who are the trained scientists that deal with fire environment, tell me they need to take that Healthy Forest Restoration Authority we gave them as a Congress in a bipartisan way and expand it out into the condition class 2 and 3 lands, the lands determined by the scientists to be most out of whack with balance in nature, to go in and do the thinning. And we know where that occurs, fire behaves differently. And you all from California know very clearly this is the kind of fire you have today. It sweeps through these areas that are overstocked, bug-infested, disease-ridden, dried out, and can't handle fire. This is the same area of that fire, Squires Peak fire, that had been treated. This area that's burning is the area that they hadn't treated yet. This is the difference. Look at the green growth here. The fire went through under the brush that had been treated, and it's fine. This picture, by the way, was shot by the last guy doing treatment as they drove away from the fire. They were out doing the treatment, and then they turned into firefighters, and he shot that out of the back of his rig. So I think we need to move forward with different legislation. This is a good one. Pass it, get it over to the Senate, declare an emergency, do this funding piece. But we need to do more. If you want to deal with these fires that are setting records for how much they consume, not only of the taxpayers' purse, but of our nation's resource, habitat, watershed, look at the greenhouse gases, the smoke, the pollutants in the atmosphere, then we have to be able to give our forest managers the tools that they've proven can work in a collaborative way around communities and extend those out into the great reserves, the forests that are condition class 2 and 3. And so I hope we can build a bipartisan coalition to do that. And I hope the chairman of the Resources Committee will help us on that. Because if we don't, then the change that's occurring in our climate with temperature will only cause these forests to grow more drought-ridden, more disease-ridden, more bug-infested, more likely to burn up in fire. And I'll tell you what, when you go back to this picture, and the Grasty's grandkids, This is what's left behind. This is not snow. This is ash and destroyed ground. These are the trees, which, by the way, may never
Gentleman's time
get
has
harvested.
expired.
Do you want to yield me another 30 seconds?
Gentleman, additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
So
for
we
an
can do
additional
better.
30 seconds.
We can be better stewards of our nation's forests. We owe it. That is our legacy to the future, is to be good stewards today. But we can't do it with the laws that are in place that impede the work. And we owe it. I mean, I can't be more passionate about this. And I've worked with many of you in a bipartisan way to pass the Healthy Forest Restoration Act and the Forest Emergency Recovery and Research Act, which the Senate failed to take up last Congress. We got to do better than we're doing now. This is a good little step forward in terms of managing the money so that the forest workers can do their work.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from West Virginia.